All right, we are here with the Vanaheim Vibes podcast. My name is Chloe Tart. With me this week is Sarenth, who is an excellent friend of mine. Sarenth, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and what you would like to be known for?
Yeah, sure. So I am Sarenth Odinsson. I am a heathen spirit worker and a Gothi of a small kindred in southeast Michigan. I also am the co-host of Around Grandfather Fire and also the co-host of Three Pagans on Tap. Around Grandfather Fire is a podcast which is about animism, polytheism, and various forms of spirituality. Three Pagans on Tap is what it says in the tin. Myself and Malik Odinson get together on that one, and we share drinks, sometimes with a guest, sometimes just the two of us. And we talk about animism, polytheism, and related topics. Around Grandfather Fire, I co host with Emily, Streaking Fate, and Snow. And it's on both occasions, these are great times for me. So that's kind of the basics of who I am.
Awesome, awesome. And let's go ahead and get you started on the basic question. What brought you into heathenry?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I've been a heathen since about '06. I've been a pagan since about '04, and became a pagan because back when I was in my high school years, I ran into my very first pagan, and it didn't go so well because I was very Catholic at the time. I was 13 years old, and I was full of that young man zeal that I had a real passion for the church. I had had mystical experiences in the church, and I felt very fulfilled by it. So when a god reached out to me not long after meeting my first pagan and kind of blew my head off my shoulders, I kind of felt like I had to look around and look deeper. So I spent much of my high school years when I wasn't doing drama, computer club, and other things. I spent my time doing research and looking things up at the very nascent internet and found quite a lot of information and places that I wanted to go deeper. So I said, fine, but I didn't feel like I could take the next step just yet because I was still living with my folks. So I said, fine, when I get to college, I'll investigate this deeper. And it turned out the goddess who was calling me at the time was Bridget. And she and I have had a wonderful, steady relationship ever since. I ran into my first coven that blew up very spectacularly, as these things do. Um, and then when I got to my next group, one of the things that really kind of has marked my life from then on was a very powerful spiritual experience in which Odin made an appearance during a guided meditation where the priestess kind of sat back and let the gods run the show. And so that was my initial exposure to Odin. And from there, I said, okay, well, I guess I'll do my research on what this is about and what Odin's about. Well, the only thing that I at that time that I could find were pamphlets on blood and soil spirituality, and I went, "Oh, hell no!"
Oh, gravy.
Yeah, I think I literally found a Sons of Vinland or Sons of Odin pamphlet, and I was like, "Nope, nope, this clearly isn't for me." So this was back in '04, '05 that I had this experience, and I didn't pursue it because the only other person I knew who was a heathen or also true was a total jackass, and I didn't want to follow him either. And so I said, well, I'll put this on the shelf for the time being. Obviously, this isn't too big of a deal. Cut to a year later, and Odin kind of like breaks into my life, shakes everything up. Because at this point, I was very happily a Kemetic polytheist priest of Anubis, had wanted nothing at all to do with the Norse because of all the crap I was fighting. And I was very happy as an Egyptian priest. Thank you very much. Well, I come to the altar one day, and Anubis says it's time to put all this down. And I said, well, what do you mean? What's wrong? He's like, oh, no, it's nothing wrong. It's your path is over here.
Oh,
Put everything on the back burner. I'm not going away, but your priest work is now on the back burner. This takes priority. Okay, shocked the hell out of me. So Odin basically came along and scooped me up and said, now we're walking together. And so that is how I came into heathenry was Odin scooped me up and said, you're mine.
oh. I mean, that generally seems to be how it works in this religion.
Yeah.
Um,
I wouldn't say you need to have a calling to be part of heathenry. I don't think you need to be called by a god to have a relationship with a god. But in my case, it was very much Odin coming along saying, "Hi, you're my son. Deal with that, and now we're going to go this way."
well, I think that a lot more people are called than they think.
Oh yeah,
Because I think that a lot of the things that drive us into one specific branch of paganism or even a specific religion um, doesn't come because we read the book and we were impressed.
right, right,
Uh, and if I were to read the book and try to feel impressed by that in heathenry, I would be very lacking because there's so little we have.
right.
Um, so I want to go ahead and really expound on your experience with the gods when you did engage with Odin. When did you find other gods come in?
Honestly, pretty immediately. So it was Odin acted kind of as a gateway god in a lot of ways. So he was kind of like there as a guide, as a helpmeet, and so one of the very first gods that I got to know very quickly after knowing him was he's like, okay, we're going to come over here and you're going to meet Loki. What? Because by this point, this is 2000, what, 2005, 2006. And so by this point, it had 2 years of people saying, well, we don't really hail Loki in circle because I worked in a predominantly Wiccan format at this point. It was polytheist, but it was still like Wiccan-ish, neo-Wiccan inspired. Um, and so a lot of people would be like, well, we might give him offerings to tell him, like, leave us alone, but we don't, like, form relationships with him. And then I went, well, that's really nice and all, but Othin is telling me go forth and make a relationship with his blood brother. Because I was reading what lore there was available and what had been translated. And I really want to emphasize this was the early 2000s. And so a lot of what was online was from the 1800s and early 1900s. And it was either you were gonna read, uh, not Budge. That's that's comedic. You were either gonna read one of maybe three authors, Olive Bray being one of them. I can't remember the other two, but one was very flowery prose in like these and thous. Um, so like it was really slim pickings at this point. It wasn't like we have today where uh, you've got a lot of this information available online in searchable formats. I don't even think the Cleesby Vigfuson dictionary was online at this point. And so if I had a question, I really, really had to dig. And it was Othin kind of like prompting me, okay, come meet this god, come have these experiences. So a lot of times I would go and have the experience, and then I'd have to reckon with it afterwards, and I'd have to find information after the fact, which was kind of neat because it kind of pushed me early on to learn how to confirm what I was experiencing as opposed to looking for the thing and then, uh, okay, well, I can only have a relationship with this particular god or ancestor or spirit in this particular format. Like, this Vatir was this way historically, and this is the only way that I can accept. There wasn't that. I didn't have that kind of access to information.
I mean, just so that way I can give this a quick heads up. The these and thous translations tend to be from Bellows.
Holland and Bellows, yeah.
So yeah, but the idea that you're the idea that you are given to the experience and that you have to make sense of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's key to heathenry and
Mm-hmm.
key to paganism in general.
Yeah.
Because those experiences really define and dictate where our praxis goes.
Yeah. I think it's important to really remind folks how little we actually have compared to other religious traditions. Because by comparison, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and they have, if nothing else, the Catechism of the Catholic Church to answer all the questions you possibly could have as a new Catholic, as somebody who's interested in initiating into the church. They have all of these materials. They have had canonical councils. They've had councils of Trent and Nicaea and all the rest. They have a backlog of, if I have a question, I can go look it up. we don't have that as much in heathenry. We're actually really nascent in that, and that's as much an advantage as it is sometimes a problem, because it makes it harder to fact check people's ice cream from bullshit, but it also makes it easier to have the experience and not second guess yourself in the moment, because if you're the only one in the moment who you're referencing, well, you kind of have to work through that first.
Right. And the I see I understand the situation to be an opportunity rather than a problem to be solved,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because this is an opportunity for us to grow and make tradition. And this is an opportunity for us to set that tradition. And part of that, I think, in heathenry should be to cement this idea that you can do whatever you want as long as it's not harmful to others. As long as it's not harmful to yourself or others, it's fine. Um, I also think that the only other wrong way to do it is by doing it alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's where I'm coming from in terms of uh, like, in terms of that, because there are other religions that do have everything that they could possibly want, but they still have the same problems that we're wrestling with like, how do we integrate this into the modern age?
Right.
And this question of how do we be ourselves in the current moment is such a hotly contested and hotly debated question that I think that it kind of beggars belief that we're having the arguments that we do and the fights that we do.
I think to a certain degree, people just get fucking bored. I wouldn't say that's like the silver bullet there, but I think part of the issue that you'll see crop up in these communities, and it can be ours, it can be monasteries, it can be charismatic Christians, is to a certain degree the everyday spiritual work is enmeshed in really boring shit you have to do. Um, I think it's actually one of the nice things about monastic life in terms of both Christian and the more modern pagan and polytheist monasticisms we're finding is there is a way of weaving the boring and the mundane together with the spiritual in a way that reifies both. It's one of the things I find very inspiring from my time as a Catholic and learning, especially about the Franciscans, and as a modern pagan, having contact with folks like Danica Swanson, who is a pagan monastic, a fabulous one at that. And so it's one of those things where I think sometimes when you don't have enough to do, you make shit up for yourself to do. There's a lot of busy work that you could easily incorporate into a spiritual mindset. Everything from washing your body to gardening to cleaning your house. Everything has the potential to be a spiritual act. And when you focus on that lens instead of, well, this is just drudge and horseshit, I think that it provides a new dimension to life. And I think more people in paganism and polytheism and animism are coming to it. I think the other part of it is that humans like to argue. They like to discuss. They like to debate. I think that's a very human thing to do.
so it's just so it's just one of those things that's just inherently human.
I would say so. I mean, we're constantly dialoguing with our gods, our ancestors, our Vetir, who I collectively call the Ginregen. I think it's normal for us as humans to argue and debate with each other. I mean, certainly the sources talk about how they could debate with each other at length, and that was before they ever drew a sword.
Right. I couldn't imagine being the fly on the wall during some of those things where who knows how pedantic someone got in their arguments or whatever, and it's like nothing's changed, I think.
No, I think one of the things that really humanizes the past for me in regards to modern heathenry is when you look at the grave goods, for instance, and Neil Price's The Viking Way is a fucking excellent book for this. Look at some of the stuff they're buried with. Like, really look at it and think about some of this stuff is definitely a grave good for the funeral. There's about three basic ways to interpret a grave good, right? There's what it meant to the dead person, what it meant to the society, and what they were hoping the object would do in the afterlife or as a result to the dead person, right? So, but when you actually look at some of these objects they're buried with, some of them are so normal that you could be like, nah, please bury me with my collection of stuff. I want to take this with me, Well, you're not going to use it in the afterlife. Well, you don't know that, and damn it, I happen to really like this particular toy. Or bury me with, Beowulf, my dog, or just like things that to me are utterly human. Like when you're looking at other people, when you're looking at the past, when you're looking at the people that you're spending your time with, and they are in your community, you really have to look at them as people and what these things mean to one another, and what they mean in context of our community, and what they mean in context of what we leave behind, right?
Right. Because I'm kind of reminded of I just recently read Heathen Garb and Gear
Mm,
from the Troth, and uh, the thing that got me when talking about the burial goods was the act was the simple act of being buried with a comb,
right.
and how important and precious that was. Because, and I think this might have to do with something that we don't think about in our modern day, because I can just go down to CVS and buy a nice comb for $5.
Right.
Meanwhile, that comb might have actually cost someone like a lot of loot.
Yeah.
That might have cost a pretty penny, and you might not have wanted to give up that comb because it was so expensive and so special and it helped you out in your life.
Yeah, when you consider the majority of combs were either made out of horn or bone, and those were often made out of cows were deeply expensive. And anything made out of that material would have been prized because of how expensive a cow was. Um, yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, we can go down and pop down and get this plastic tooth comb, no problem. It takes real work to actually make a bone comb. I saw a Facebook has this rotating video of essays that go into different crafts, and I wish I could remember which country they're from, but they're all subtitled. And one of them was how modern artisans make bone combs the old way today, and it's like a 5-day process of taking this from a rounded horn to a flat surface, and then you've got to cut the teeth into it, and then you've got to finish it. It's a whole process, and that's
Right.
using modern tools.
And it's really one of those things that we do not appreciate, I think, very much.
No, I think that if you've ever had the opportunity to sit down and do a craft with your hands, and I say this whether you're using power tools like a Dremel or whether you're sitting down with, oh, say, chisels. And I've done a bit of carving, I've done a bit of dremeling, and there is a definite difference between the stuff that you make, even if it's not 100% the absolute best. There's a big, big difference between this was clearly cranked out in a factory versus I made this. And it's not just the experience of doing it, it's how the material feels in your hands. I know for myself, when I make leather bags, the leather is generally thicker than what you can get out of any store. And partly that's because they intentionally thin it down. But it's also because we live in an age where there is an assumption that we can just get another thing.
Right. And in those times, maybe you got that bone comb and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. This lasts you for your lifetime.
Yeah, because that whole idea of like getting down and dirty and making something that is yours, there's something animistic about it, in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that you are putting your anima into this object. You
Yeah.
are putting a part of your energy, a part of your soul into the soul of another thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that we miss this until we get to like handicrafts like blacksmithing, um, or when we get to people who actually like will make these objects. Like, there's a big difference between buying somebody's handmade shawl off of Etsy versus going into a boutique shop and buying one. And let me back that train up because a lot of boutique shops nowadays have handmade items, but I would say probably like the higher end department stores, you can tell that this was made on a line, right? But there's also not this assumption that it's going to live, and I think that subject of living is actually a really important one that a lot of people miss nowadays because so much of our culture in the overculture in America is like, well, we're just going to buy a new one. We're going to throw this away when it gets old. Like, no, you're going to use this till it completely falls apart, and then you're going to repair it, and it's going to become other things.
And because like Heathen Garb and Gear makes another point that like it takes like pounds of raw material to even make a shirt, and you repair that shirt and you live with that shirt for as long as you can.
Mm-hmm.
um when it comes to these kind of things though, um I think this is why we have so much emphasis on the gods' belongings in our lore. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do we really know what is Zeus's preferred weapon? But yet, in the Norse side, we do. We know what Odin's preferred weapon is. It's Gungnir.
Right.
Um,
We know what Odin's ring is.
yeah, Draupnir, and we know what we know what they prized and what they had attachments to,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that attachments are important. It is important. I kind of have a semi Buddhist philosophy on attachment, but I also
Mm-hmm.
believe that like you're allowed to enjoy things in this world as they are now, and you actually do have the obligation to enjoy these things.
I can agree with that. I think that part of the beauty of materiality is relationship, and we. So I drink pop. I drink a lot of it. Right. What is my relationship to pop? It empowers me. It helps me focus. It brings me to sometimes higher states if I drink enough of it. Right. Um, you can trance off of pop if you drink enough of it.
I've tranced off of Jolt Cola back in the day. I didn't know it was trance, but it was trance.
Yeah. So you can relate to the materiality of an object without obsessing over its materiality because it is a conveyor of relationship. Now, my relationship with my Zevia or my Diet Pepsi is very one sided, but I am nonetheless grateful to caffeine. I am nonetheless grateful to the can, the metal that comes out of the bones of this earth for providing the ability to have a cold can of pop. You know, when you talk about materiality in relationship with physical objects, I think that people miss that yes, even with the stuff that you're going to throw away or recycle, there is a relationship because there is no real away. Like if people say, I'm going to throw something away, there's this stopgap thought thing that happens where away becomes this place where they put stuff and they don't connect it to this is going to a landfill that is local to me. This
Right.
is going to a recycling center. This is local to me.
This is going to sit in your backyard for who knows how many years.
Right. Yeah. It's also why I think composting is so very important. And it's part of why we hold a composting shrine to Nithog and Hela on our property because the materiality is important and how we treat the stuff we have finished eating or that we've prepared. The bits that we can't eat need to be passed on and not just for a landfill. This is going to be renewing the fertility of the garden or enhancing it. Uh, Eggshells, scraps of food, whatever. This materiality is rich in relationship in part because we bring parts of ourselves to it, and it brings a lot of itself to us, right?
Right. It's the idea that if you give to the earth will give back.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the responsibilities that heathens, polytheists, and animists writ large hold with the earth is that reciprocity. Wherever we can, we need to close the loops of relationality so that it's a circle instead of a linear pathway. Because the lie of externalities is that your stuff goes somewhere. And I heard an excellent illustration of what an externality was yesterday on my TikTok feed. The professor was trying to explain this to his class. Now, this dude's a capitalist, and he thought that this was just like him being really harsh and direct with the students. He said, who among you here wants to buy this cigarette from me for $1?" And he said, had a student raise their hand, and he handed him over $1, and he handed the student a cigarette. He says, "Okay, light it up." And he was dead serious about it. He's like, "What, here? Yeah, light it up right now, in front of me, next to all these other students, because they were in a lecture hall." And then, all these other people around him start getting bothered by the smoke, and he says, "Okay, you can extinguish it now. Congratulations, that's an externality."
Huh.
Yeah.
That's impressive, and it gets to the heart of the issue that like part of the reciprocity is a matter of cultural contract.
Yeah.
Is that social contract of making sure that we are all in good relationship with each other,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it really is right relationship that we really need to be emphasizing as heathens, so that way we can go ahead and move forward, so that way we can start thinking in more deeper ways.
Yeah. It's for me, this is why lighting sacred fires in a certain way is so important, because if the fire is too easy to light, we kind of get blasé with it, right? So I have learned how to start fires relatively quickly with flint and steel. And I did so because I bashed the crap out of my hands for the first 4 hours when I first lit my first sacred fire. I have still yet to do a friction fire. I find that way more difficult. Some people, they can get one lit in about a minute. That is not a skill I possess yet. But the point still remains that our relationship with how we do things is in part a container for how we then relate to the thing being done, or the relationship with the being that comes forth out of that relationship. Because if you've never put your hands on the earth and grown something, or if you've never put your hands on an animal, there's this gap of relationality and knowledge because it's externalized and especially abstracted. Like when people do not understand where their meat comes from, when people do not understand the process of how your food gets to you, that disconnect is so profound that when you get on the other side of it and you're harvesting out of the earth, or you're slaughtering and butchering an animal, there's almost this break with the rest of consensus reality, because the overculture is so divorced from the reality of what they're engaging in that it's an initiation.
It's an awakening to a reality that has been clearly in front of your eyes, but you just haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this was really brought home when I was listening to kids talk about how meat and vegetables come from the store, not from animals, and I'm like, surely you've seen a farm, but some of these kids never have laid eyes on an actual meat animal before they've eaten it. I mean, this is one of the things that was so important to my family, that they at least get to know a representative of the animals that they're going to be eating. We actually incorporate prayers to various named heathen animals in our meal prayers. Althumla for anything that has beef in it or cheese. Gullen Combi for anything with chicken or turkey. Um, Gullen Bursty for anything with pork. And Haythrun for anything with goat.
What about Mimir when you have a beer with a nice head on it?
That's a great idea, actually.
Um, I want to go ahead and transition a little and move the conversation over to Freya, because right now, during this phase of the podcast, our next phase will be the next phase will be open to the gods.
Hmm.
Um, could you describe your relationship with Freya and the Vanir in general?
Oh, goodness. So Othin brought me into relationship with Freya in a very similar way that he brought me into relationship with Loki, in that pretty shortly after I became his and became a heathen, he started doing this thing where he would introduce me to different gods, and she was one of the first, like right after Loki and Frigg. I think maybe Thor was after her. Um, but she has been a very, very important part of my life ever since. And so that introduction was in a spiritual trance journey. And so a lot of that was going to her hall. I believe at the time I was going exclusively to Sessrumnir. I didn't journey to Vanaheim until years later. And met with her, and she says, "Oh, okay, you're one of Odin's, no problem. We'll work on our relationship here, no problem." And began immediately to bring me into Sather. And the ways that she brought me into Sather, I learned later because I hadn't read anything on Sather. What she was teaching me was Sather in terms of boiling and shaking and rocking and getting into a trance head state and being receptive to the spirits, that kind of thing. So her and I's relationship was very much okay, we're going to talk, we're going to get right to work. And it's been kind of like that ever since.
Freya is a lady who likes to get to work. That's one of the things I love about her.
Mm-hmm.
She gets right down to business, and
Yeah,
it's
like
beautiful.
introductions were over, and she's like, "Cool, now I'm going to come teach you this thing, and you're going to practice this for a while, and just this." My relationship with the other Vanir came afterwards, sometime afterwards, actually. Uh, I want to say 6 months or so. I finally met Freyr and Njorther, and I don't have as deep a relationship with Njorther. He seems very distant to me, and oceans freak me out a little bit. Just to be perfectly honest about it.
I mean,
Like,
they are vast expanses of water that will end your life if you get into them in the wrong way.
yeah.
So it's very much appropriate to have that reaction to vast quantities of water like that.
I vibe more with that in terms of Ron and Aegir now, but back then I didn't know Njorther very well. And the shipfather has been kind enough to remind me, hey, you did love fishing and canoeing. I do like that too. Oh, okay. And it was also kind enough to remind me, hey, you live in the Great Lakes region. What's all around you?
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're near Lake Michigan. I'm not going to try to dox you, but you're near Lake Michigan, aren't you?
I'm in between like a lot of the lakes. So I'm in southeast Michigan, and like Erie isn't that far away. Michigan's not that far away. I'm really not that far away from any lake if I want to take 1 to 3 hours to go find one. Like it's I love being here because they're so accessible.
Awesome. And when you've worked with Freya, has there been any sort of like has it been entirely with that skill based approach, um or has it been something similar to my experience where there was a lot of life stuff also that she taught me about?
So I kind of buried the lead on this one. Before she let me learn Sather from her, she said, "Before you learn this, you have to go and figure your sexuality and gender shit out first." So she sent at the time I was in college, and so she sent me to go because there was a period of time where I just learned Sather from her and developed a relationship with her, and then there was a gap of like several years where okay, we're just going to let you do your thing and you're going to learn. And then I went to a different college. And back when she was going to teach me different aspects of Scythe and Spa was when she said, okay, you know, you've done a lot of work in the interim years. Now you get to go and deal with your gender and sexuality shit if you want to learn deeper stuff. What do you mean? Well, there was a LGBTQIA plus group on campus that met once a week, I think, and it was like a sharing circle kind of a thing. And so she's like, go to that and talk about your experiences and let yourself cry a little. Okay. I assumed at the time I was a cis enough guy and straight enough guy. Found out very quickly that neither of those was 100% rocky or true. And so I come back to her and she's like, okay, good. Now we can take this deeper. Because after a couple of sessions, it was very clear to me like I didn't completely identify with this identity I'd grown up with. And I had to do some deconstructing and reconstructing. So,
And a lot of it was finding your true self, like making your
mm-hmm.
own self from what you had available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's aspects of masculinity that I very much enjoy, and there's aspects of femininity and non-binariness that I learned to enjoy because it was no longer in the context of my old religion, my old culture, and I had a place where I could experience and experiment with those freely.
And it's really in taking that responsibly, that
Mm-hmm.
freedom responsibly, I think is kind of Freya's jam.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, a lot of it has been take your meds, go to therapy, and take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Messaging from Freya.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that messaging seems to be very coherent with a lot of what I've been hearing from other heathens, which has been, she will tell you the things that you need to hear.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that she did for me, which was very healing, was to appreciate my masculinity in a different way. You know, you grow up with a lot of this machismo and bullshit in a lot of American circles, and a man just, is the one that does violence. Well, anybody can do violence for starters, but if violence is the only thing that marks you out as a man, that's a really shallow existence.
Right.
And one of the things that she really like made me reckon with were some of the role models I had growing up with. Not in terms of my family, but in terms of the overculture's media and the stuff that I grokked, the masculine figures that I looked to in media, especially such as Aragorn or Boromir. These were men worthy of emulation, as opposed to, I am the domineering, the stereotypical 1950s man who's going to run the house and you're under my boot kind of shit. And so she really kind of made me glom even harder onto some of the positive role models I grew up with, because the sensitivity and the care and love were as important to their characters and the content of their stories that shaped my life than their ability to wield a sword.
Right. The ability to not have to wield the sword, to do things, to not
Mm-hmm.
require to go to battle. Um like Sun Tzu says a lot of things about being able to like battle without like be able to accomplish the goal without battling, and that's a bigger win than winning an actual fight.
Mm-hmm. One of the passages from Tolkien that always struck and stuck with me was, "The hands of the king are the hands of a healer."
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it was, I think, during the Fellowship of the Ring, and I believe it was originally Goldberry who talked about it, because they were trying to find Aethelas, Kingsfoil, to help Frodo with his wound, and there seemed to be like this inner light coming from Aragorn as he was tending to uh, Frodo, and there was this passage that it stuck with me, and it was like, wow, okay. And it honestly, for me, there's resonance in the sagas there, because it's something that crops up a lot, in that some of these chieftains who are really known for their war making were also known for their peacemaking. And it's not as emphasized because, I mean, these are oral stories and there's excitement to be had, and you're talking around a fire and you want to make sure your audience is really ginned up and interested in what you have to say. But there's also this kind of backdrop of the really good kings were also healers and peacemakers. And I think that's part of the emphasis that Freya needed me to hear was like, yes, the martial aspect is going to be important for you, but there's this entire other aspect that you cannot ignore with it.
And from that, you found a version of yourself that you liked. It
Yeah.
seems,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and it's like it may not be your highest self, but it is definitely your most favorite so far.
It's a lot healthier than the pablum and junk food that the overculture gives AMAB folks. It's a lot more healthy and more balanced, I think, because if you're constantly in the I'm looking for the next fight, you're going to find one, but it's going to be with the people that are around you. It's going to be a lot of lateral violence. It's not going to be with people that you actually should be fighting.
And that's a very illuminating point because like so many like I've seen so many internet communities fall apart due to infighting and due to people looking for that fight and
Mm-hmm.
not being ready to deal with the peace, to deal with building.
I think it's one of the things that I appreciate about the Vanir is that can they go to war? Bet your ass. Do they want to? Not fucking really. But if
Yeah,
you bring the
Freyr,
fight to them,
yeah, they will fight back.
the thing that I really appreciate about the Vanir writ large is they get typecast as these these weak, almost soft-handed farmers, and it's like, do you have you ever seen a corn-fed country guy lift a bale of hay? Have you ever seen a AFAB person like work on land for 10, 20 years and what their body is sculpted into at the end of that? Like, you can't be weak and be a farmer.
And not just that, but the Vanir have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to wage war. Like
Right.
the joke about Mimir's head, you know, the Vanir are not messing around.
No, no, you sent us some shit gifts here. Have your hostages back, you jackasses. Like the Vanir will kick your teeth in if push comes to shove, but they'll also hand you a bowl of soup if that's an easier way to preserve the peace or restore the peace. That's the other thing I appreciate about the Vanir writ large, and it's one of the things that I don't think actually stands in contrast as much with the Asgardians, with the Aesir, that they both have these aspects of peacemaking and frith making. But I think to a certain degree, like there's this tutelage they had to give to the Aesir, and there's really they're penultimate masters of sorcery, of the growing of things, and part of that growing of things is also the growing of relations and peace and goodwill, which is something we sorely fucking need. Because if like I said earlier, if we're constantly looking for fights, we're gonna find them, but we're gonna find them with each other. Because I can nitpick you to death about whatever stupid little shit I want to, or I can say, you know what, this is your journey, this is your life to lead. This isn't my bag, and I'm not cohabitating with you, so it shouldn't grate me that much, right? There's a certain amount of perspective the Vanir kind of in their worldliness bring that I appreciate, because it's almost like, are you going to give a flying fuck about this in a year? No, stop fighting about it.
Right, right.
You're scaring off the fish. Chill.
And it's really I think that's really the kind of model that I think we should be figuring out for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know why heathenry devolves into fights so often, but it seems like we're not learning our lesson. It doesn't seem like we're learning what's just not just in our history but in our lore.
Mm-hmm.
Like Njál's saga ended with peacemaking.
Right.
Um, the saga of the Volsungs ended because, they couldn't give up a grudge and it destroyed them.
Right. There's so many sagas that warn against blood feuds that you wonder if people are actually reading it with any kind of like. I know that the common joke around the internet right now is media literacy is dead, but damn, folks, like if you're actually going to sit down and read the sagas, read the conclusion too, not just the cool bits.
Right. And I think that like we are missing the point,
Mm-hmm.
because if if this warrior culture had stayed this warrior culture, we wouldn't have a peaceful Norway today, or a peaceful Sweden today, or a peaceful Iceland today. It wouldn't have developed that way. It would be stuck in that warrior mindset. And the fact that it wasn't, and the fact that it, maybe Christianity had something to do with it, but the starting culture just wasn't as, I don't know, tied into that martial aspect that we want it to be. Like, the stories are exciting, but like the
Mm-hmm.
reality was that they were mostly farmers, smiths, and weavers, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to push back slightly because
Oh,
I think the problem isn't a warrior culture; it is a culture of fighting. Because the thing to me that differentiates a warrior from a fighter, and maybe this is just me splitting hairs, what differentiates a warrior from a fighter is there to fight. A warrior is like, I am here if there's a conflict. I think of this like far better to have a warrior in the garden kind of idea. Um, because I don't think that the warrior mindset itself is a problem in terms of like preparedness, care for the community. I apply a warrior mindset to my prepping, to how I prepare for emergencies, what I buy and how I buy it. I think the problem is that the warrior serves a community, the fighter serves themselves.
ooh, I think it's worth splitting hairs sometimes, and this is definitely one of those times.
I the thing is like when you look at the people in the sagas who are like really pointed out as like these people are fucking nasty. They are more often than not antisocial. Sometimes they are renowned as berserkers or occasionally wolf shirts, Ulfhethnar. Um, so you've got these guys who are like these big muscly tanks if they're berserkers, or opportunist fighters if they're Ulfhethnar. And they're often cast opposite to the hero who is pro-social, who fights with or for his people. These guys invariably fight for themselves. I think there's one story, and of course, I can't remember the details because ADHD is lovely like that, where there's one guy on an island who fights off like 13 of them at a stretch to, I think, defend somebody's honor or defend somebody else in his community. But it's a common enough trope in the sagas that the pro social people end up being heroes, and the antisocial folks end up getting killed by the hero or getting ostracized.
And really, what is pro-social behavior but just frith building?
Right, exactly. And I mean, like Njal, Egil, and various other named sagas are full of these guys just trying to either keep the peace and fail, which I think is something that pops up, I believe, in both Egil and Njal's saga, if memory serves. Um, and like you said, Njal's saga ends with frith making. And I think that is such an important and often forgotten part. And the thing with frith making is that it's not like the Christian concept of forgive and forget that we have in this overculture. Like, no, you fucked up, you did wrong, you do wear guild for it, or you pay your shuld, and then we can move on from there once the scales have been balanced.
You should do the work.
Right. Like it's not like a get out of jail free card. Like frith making is a process, and I think one of the things that the heathen communities need to get better about is actually nailing down what that process looks like in different contexts. Because assuming a one size fits all isn't going to work, but not working on the process of how we make frith isn't going to help anybody.
Right. And there seems to be any resistance to the idea that we should codify anything
Mm-hmm.
when our lore says that plenty of stuff is codified. I mean, we had law speakers.
You had a law of rock that they would stand on while they're reciting a third of the law at least once a year. Yeah. Yeah. Like, this is a thing. Like, yes, we had rules. We had, if nothing else, Robert's Rules of Order could point us the way and we could develop the rest as we go along. Like, we can do this.
You'd be surprised. You would be surprised what we are incapable of doing because of our own stubbornness.
I wish I could say I don't because I can be a stubborn jackass at times. But it goes to it kind of goes to the point that, you know, what we can't build anything lasting though if we're constantly doing this fighting back and forth, right? Like, if we hope to build anything lasting, we can't expect everybody to be a paragon all the time. Nobody should be up on that high of a pedestal. But also some basic standards of how you go about making reparations and engaging in frith are absolutely necessary, because the black and white thinking in this country is fucking killing us. And it's certainly preventing us from doing anything useful politically or otherwise. And I mean that in terms of community organization. I mean that in terms of heathenry, polytheism, animism. Any community that has no procedure for reconciliation and repair is doomed to fail.
Because the cracks will form and there's nothing to patch over. There's nothing to fix it.
Yeah, if you don't know how to spackle this or to tear the drywall out and replace it, you're going to either live with a hole in the wall or you're going to do a rushed patch job, and it's going to show. And I think that is one of the things that heathenry writ large needs to develop, because it's one of the big weaknesses that gives way to white supremacy in our own ranks. And I mean that in terms of, when you give these folks absolutely nowhere to go and you say you are outcast forevermore, okay, congratulations. There are people that cannot do work with white supremacists, and I'm not saying that should be in everybody's thing. I'm actually not saying that they should be welcome in your community or my community. I am saying that there does need to be a process for de-radicalization. It's just not my work. But I can
Right.
see the manifest issue with not having those processes.
Right. We're just leaving people twisting in the wind.
Or we're leaving them for the AFA to pick them up and say, oh, it's okay, we've got you.
Yes, and they are very willing to do all those things that we seem to be very hesitant to do.
I would say that the problem with modern heathenry is that we are so much more worried about appearing to be white supremacist that we are unwilling to do the work to actually not be white supremacist. And this can come out in how we talk about things, how we express ourselves, and it can come out in a lot of microaggressions. It doesn't even need to be like in your face. It's, you can have the best of intentions, but if the process isn't there, it's an ongoing issue. I don't entirely know how to solve it, but I think that one of the keys to the Vanir is they will show you either how to make community or how to make community safe.
Ooh, that would certainly make a lot of sense. In the initial calling with Freya, she said that you're gonna find the others who are into me, and I did not know what she meant by that. And apparently, that turns out I'm starting a community, and because there just wasn't a Vonatru community that was gelled together anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
so I had to do it.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges I find with a lot of our gods, where you know there's a problem, you have ideas on how to do solutions, and then they look at you and go tap their foot and go, uh huh. You know, it's not necessarily that you're the best or the least qualified. It's the you're the one who's qualified in doing the work.
Well, I
And
would. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, or you're just the one who showed up to do the work.
That's just it. Like, you're obviously the most qualified person if you're the one doing the work. And I think one of the things that would really benefit heathenry is not only this idea of networking and frith weaving, but the idea of leadership for, not leadership under, um, which is something I see in the sagas a lot, although because it's through a very Christianized and very more rightward lens a lot of times, sometimes picking that apart can be a little difficult. But I actually think this is where the story of Aun being a wrong story, to borrow a term from Tyson Yunkaporta, um, is very helpful because Aun shows us all the ways not to be a ruler. Uh, do you know the story of Aun? Aun the Old?
I do not actually.
So briefly, Aun makes a deal with Odin where if he sacrifices one of his sons, he gets so much time to live. And it's kind of like the Fisher King story in that initially, Aun is a very excellent ruler and he lives for a very long time. But as he continues to sacrifice each one of his sons, he gets less and less time to the point where he's like an old man who can only suck out of a milk bottle, which is a horn. That's the only sustenance he can do, and he is so decrepit, and the land is so jacked because of his mismanagement by this point that rather than sacrifice the last son for him just to get a little bit more life, the people sacrifice him, and it's a 8-year cycle. If you want to look more into it, Nordic animism, by Rune Hjalmar Rasmussen, has an excellent. I believe he's got a book out on it now, where he talks about the Aun year, which is an 8-year cycle where you come out of and then back into good relationship with the land and with the spirits. And I actually did an Aun celebration with my local community, 2 years ago now, where we made a somebody had made a bread version of him, and we tore pieces out of him apart and then tossed him in the sacred fire.
Oh,
Yeah. you know, um, and so for me, one of the things about the Vanir, and I this is a very authentic story, but I also feel like there's aspects of the Vanir there too, especially with the bread. Um, if the king doesn't sacrifice for the land comes under threat and eventually starts to deteriorate. And that lack of reciprocity really shows. And I think that broader speaking, the communities really need a way of restoring so that we're not doing this 8, 9, 10-year cycle where, okay, things have blown up in our faces yet again. We need to continuously work on coming back into relationality with each other, with the community, and what we're all here to do.
and on that note, we are at about an hour.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it until I looked at the time and realized it's 58 minutes, not 45 like I thought it was. I want to go ahead and wrap this up and get your addition to the playlist.
Oh, yes. So this is a song by Laboratorium Pieśni, which is Stoś Pomoru. Uh, excellent, beautiful group. I have a couple of their albums. You can find them on Bandcamp. And the Stoś Pomoru translates to "out there on the sea."
Ooh, so this one goes out to Norther.
When I first picked it up, so because of the female vocals and the chorus, I definitely felt a very Freya vibe to it, but I think it's kind of a combo of Mardal specifically, um, and Norther.
Excellent, excellent. So this will be added to the playlist. The playlist will be found on everheartempire.com. Sarah, we do need to get back together again and have a long and have another chat because you're an amazing guest, and I want to go ahead and see what else we can get into and see how deeper we can go with this.
Absolutely, let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. All right, and I want to go ahead and bring the podcast to a close. Again, if you want to go ahead and join the Discord, it's at everheartempire.com. If you want to email me, the link's right there. Um, and as always, I tutor the Otar o Senor. Have a good night.